On the 12th of July, 1991, a strange letter was sent to Dominic Murray in Leeds. It was from his 18-year-old fiancée, Julie Dart. He immediately showed the letter to Julie's mother, Lynn.
Hello, Dominic. Help me, please. I've been kidnapped and I'm being held as a personal security until next Monday night. Please go and tell my mum straight away. Love you so much, Dominic. Mum, phone the police straight away and help me. I'm not eating anything, but I've been offered food. Feeling a bit sick, but I'm drinking 2 cups of tea a day. Mum, Dominic, help me. Love you all, Julie. You know, it just sounds so fine. I love you all. Man, please help me.
On the same day, West Yorkshire police also received a strange letter, their first ever blackmail demand. Unless they handed over £140,000, an unnamed department store would be firebombed, and the young girl who had been taken hostage would be killed. Both letters were handed to Detective Superintendent Bob Taylor of West Yorkshire Police.
We had established that the young woman herself, Julie Dart, an 18-year-old girl, had been missing all week. We'd done checks with her friends and her family, and no one had seen it. And by the weekend, things were looking quite grave indeed. We had to consider that this was a serious demand that we had made on us. And there was a tremendous amount of activity over that weekend in terms of making decisions, what we should do. Yeah, okay.
A specialist police squad was called in.
Okay.
Delivery of the ransom money was less than 72 hours away.
Next Tuesday, a WPC will drive to Birmingham New Street Station with the money. She must be there by 6 p.m. and await the call at 7 p.m. She will then be given the location of the next phone call.
The courier waited.
With any kidnap, extortion situation, we are under tremendous pressure. If you get it wrong, you are dealing with someone's life, and therefore each step has to be very, very carefully considered.
Over 100 plainclothes detectives scanned the crowds. The call came in.
Hello?
The line went dead. 3 days later, the kidnapper did make contact.
A murder investigation launched after a battered body was found next to the A1 in Lincolnshire. Graham Thompson reports.
Police say it was a brutal murder. She'd been beaten around the head and left wrapped in a bedsheet.
There's something on the news about a young girl being found. What did the name? Bludgeoned to death. I hate that word and all. Bludgeoned to death in a field in Grantham.
Police believe her body was dumped in the field just 48 hours before it was found on Friday morning. They're appealing...
I went with another officer up to Lynn's house. Then walked out of the lounge and we met in the doorway between the lounge and the kitchen.
And I said, it's our Jolie in that field.
I said, yeah, it is. It's Julie. Don't worry, Lynn. We'll catch the killer.
So it's what that poor mother must be going through and what that kid must have gone through. I'm talking about myself. Didn't expect her to be dead. I really didn't. She'd enrolled to go in the army. She wanted to be a training instructor for athletics. She was doing rather well at the time. She was very popular indeed. She loved dancing. She had a boyfriend. She was my best friend, as well as my daughter. But I can imagine her crying for me, wanting me to help her. She asked me in the letter to help her. I never did know, did I?
Superintendent Taylor received a second letter.
Words will never be able to express my regret that Julie Dart had to be killed. She was tied up and hit a few blows to the back of the head and then strangled. But I did warn what would happen if anything went wrong.
The letter was indicating and suggesting quite strongly to us that we'd got it wrong and that Julie died because we'd got it wrong. He was seeking to turn the screw on us.
The pathology report showed that the kidnapper had never intended to release Julie. She'd been killed in cold blood, only a day after she'd been kidnapped, and 6 days before the delivery of the ransom at Birmingham New Street Station.
I still intend to carry out this campaign until I receive the monies, however many people suffer.
We've got someone here who's got a pretty twisted sort of mind, who's playing games with the police, has killed, is still demanding the money, is using the death to reinforce the demand, the death of Julie. We've got a serious problem.
To understand what was going on inside the mind of the murderer, the police asked a forensic psychologist, Paul Britton, for help. This was the first major case where they'd worked with a criminal profiler.
He's a person who will have a record, and the police will have become something of an issue for him. He will have felt they've treated him badly, they shouldn't have caught him, he will have felt that they're responsible in some way for what happened to him. And so they, if you like, have to become the primary victim. So it's not just a question of these are the people who I need as my opponent. I'm also going to teach them a lesson. I'm going to punish them for what happened before.
The police trawled their records for anyone who might harbour a grudge against them. It might even be an ex-police officer who'd quit in disgrace. A forensic team examined the envelope used by the killer. They found an intriguing indentation. It read, "Mavis will not be in Tuesday, Phil." This may have been the killer's writing, or something that happened when the letter was sorted at the post office.
If that was the one mistake the killer had made, we had to seek to capitalise upon that. To consider how many people could have accidentally indented that onto the envelope, we had to go through the post office and who could have handled it. 900 people. And if you don't do the whole 900, there's no point in doing one.
The police widened their search. They examined local council records and the electoral roll for the mystery Phil and Mavis. More police officers were drafted in to help. Amongst them, a Detective Sergeant Tim Grogan.
I remember being involved in the Phil and Mavis inquiry, trying to eliminate individuals who lived together like that. That took up a lot of our time in the early days. But the good thing about this inquiry was that always the fish was there waiting to be caught. He was always going to come near our boat by sending a substantial amount of letters and providing little bits of detail. What we had to ensure was that when he did get near the boat, somebody had the gaff there to rip him into our boat.
The killer continued with his deadly game by threatening to kidnap a prostitute. He told the police to place a message in the Sun newspaper if they wanted to avoid more dead bodies. It was to read, "Let's try again for Julie's sake." The first attempt was at a service station on the M1, but the kidnapper's taped message was inaudible.
Your WPC should have been able to hear. I have tried it on an extension.
The second attempt was 5 days later, but he never called.
Could not make it Tuesday evening due to the fact that there was no suitable hostage.
Then, on August the 14th, a third attempt took place. Contact was finally made.
Write this down.
Okay. Sarah Davis. Walkman Gardens, Ipswich.
The killer gave the name of the kidnapped prostitute. But then he rang off, promising to telephone again. When he did, the phone jammed. All contact was lost. There never was a Sarah Davis. It was a deliberate hoax. the killer was playing games with the police. Months passed. Over 50 detectives were now working on the case. Clues from where Julie's body had been found yielded nothing. 284 Phil and Mavises who lived together had been traced and questioned. But again, nothing. All the lines of inquiry seemed to be going nowhere. In desperation, Superintendent Taylor decided to go public on September the 12th with what he thought was his best clue, the Phil and Mavis envelope.
This is a copy of a letter from a murderer. It's one of several written to the police, and the killer suggests it will be his last communication. Bob Taylor, whoever your man is, he travels...
400 people telephoned Crime Watch that night, but no one phoned about Phil and Mavis. It was later found to be another hoax, planted by the killer to waste police time and confuse the investigation. The police were no nearer to catching the murderer.
Julie's coffin was supported by her elder brothers as it was carried into St. Wilfrid's Church in Hare Hills. Leading the mourners were Julie's mother Lynn and her younger brother Paul.
Julie Dart's funeral was secretly filmed by the police. Superintendent Taylor knew that murderers often attend their victims' funerals. Amongst the family mourners, there might be an unknown face, a stranger, the murderer.
Julie's funeral, yes, it was a very emotional time, and there's a great sense of we've failed because we haven't delivered. We haven't found the killer. And if we haven't found the killer by now, what are the chances?
On October the 7th, the killer broke his silence with a dramatic new move. He sent British Rail a blackmail letter. Unless £200,000 was handed over, an intercity train would be derailed. The letter was shown to British Rail engineers. They said his plan would work. Hundreds of passengers could be killed.
The killing of people is a matter that is entirely incidental to him. Remember, this is a man who by now has with his own hand bludgeoned somebody to death. 100, 200, 400 people on a train are entirely abstract. Nothing to do with him. So yes, he's perfectly capable of killing a train full of people. And if the train had been derailed and people had been killed, it wouldn't have been his fault. It would have been those people who hadn't done what he'd asked.
At the ransom drop, the police didn't follow his instructions, so he wrote again.
Within a week or so, a small penalty will be imposed.
An electrified pantograph that powers express trains would be knocked onto the carriages, causing a potentially lethal catastrophe. Days later, workmen found a shattered concrete block on the main West Coast train line in Staffordshire. It had been dangled from a bridge. It was addressed to the chief executive of British Rail.
Although there were no reports of any damage to trains, what he'd done was incredibly dangerous and could have caused severe damage to the train or the train driver. We were left wondering, what on earth is this man going to do next?
On Wednesday, the 22nd of January 1992, Stephanie Slater from Shipways Estate Agents showed a Mr. Southwell around a semi-detached house in a Birmingham suburb. But this was no ordinary viewing.
You show that many people around that many houses, you don't really pay any attention to it. You just answer what they want to know and, you know, tell them a little bit about the house as you go around. He was just another client. I got my back to him at this time, and I turned round and he got these weapons at me. And I remember just grabbing the weapons and trying to push him back. But he pushed me, forced me down into the bath. And as I lay in the bath, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the mirror, and he got the knife at my throat. And I think that was the most terrifying thing. And that's the most predominant thing that sticks out in my mind, more than anything, is that image and realising that, oh my God, he's going to kill me. I was put in the front seat. I got into the front seat and the seat was reclined backwards, quite a way back, so I couldn't be seen through the window. It terrified me, absolutely terrified me, because I couldn't believe this was happening.
Around midday, the kidnapper rang the shipway's office.
Listen, Stephanie Slater. She's been kidnapped. There'll be a ransom in the post tomorrow. Contact the police or anyone, and she'll die.
Stephanie's manager, Kevin Watts, was immediately told about the call.
It felt right that I had to go down to the property to see for myself if there was anything there to give any indication that Stephanie had been taken. I went down with a male member of staff, and we saw that the French doors were wide open. We saw that there was some little bits of blood in the bathroom, and when we came downstairs there was also some blood there. The realisation of a member of staff had been taken, it was a sickening feeling, right to the pit of my stomach.
Kevin phoned his boss, who authorised him to contact the police.
When the police arrived, I was surprised they arrived in marked police cars with flashing lights. And I mentioned at the time that I was concerned because the person that made the call into the office had said if there was any police involvement, then she would be killed.
News reached police headquarters. The West Midlands' most senior crime investigator, Assistant Chief Constable Phil Thomas, took charge.
It had been substantiated by then, the call had been received back at Shipways that it was a genuine kidnapping, and the uniform branch were in attendance at the scene, which we had to very quickly remedy and go to a covert situation.
They had no kidnap training. We had no kidnap training. In fact, I think no one on the whole inquiry had been anywhere near a kidnapping. The last one had been, as far as I was aware, was the tragic one involving Leslie Whittle in the West Midlands, you know, with the tragic consequences that had. But we learned a little bit about that from that.
The police requested an immediate press blackout. Journalists would be kept informed, but to safeguard Stephanie's life, they would agree to publish nothing until she'd been safely returned.
Have you managed to determine whether, from experience, whether this is a good amateur or a professional?
He's got me worried, you know. I wouldn't like to meet a real professional if he's a poor amateur. That same evening, we recognised, because one of the letter that was left at Shipways linked the inquiry fairly firmly in our mind with the Julie Dart murder. So this made this particular inquiry, in my mind, even more difficult, because now we're not only dealing with a kidnapper, we're dealing with a kidnapper who's already murdered a previous hostage.
An entire police station in Birmingham was taken over by more than 200 detectives, brought in to get Stephanie back alive.
We were actually being controlled to a certain degree by the kidnapper's demands. If you like, we were the puppets of the kidnapper. He was pulling the strings, and we were very much aware of that. Now, one of those strings he'd already pulled was this demand that the police weren't involved. So, of course, we had to be covert.
That was a smack in the face to me, and it was a smack in the face to the officers. Detectives, police officers, detectives do not like the control to be wrested into somebody else's hands. And on this occasion, this is exactly what is happening. The kidnapper is calling the shots.
For example, what we couldn't do was where the girl had gone from Turnberry Road, the Turnberry Road address, what we couldn't do was house to house. We couldn't have police officers going up and down. Did you see anybody? Now, at the end of the day, somebody must have seen Stephanie pull up in a car and be met by a man. But we couldn't, during those initial stages, ask those questions, because the kidnapper could have been there watching us.
Stephanie, bound and blindfolded, was taken to the same cold, dark place where Julie Dart had been strangled to death. She was squeezed into a coffin-like box, manacled, and told she'd be electrocuted if she attempted escape.
It's a bag that covers Walker Road.
That same night, detectives rummaged through hundreds of thousands of letters at the Birmingham sorting office. They wanted a head start on the instructions the kidnapper said would be in the post.
Yeah, that's it.
At 4 a.m., they found what they were looking for.
This is Stephanie Slater. The time is 11:45. I can assure you I am okay and unharmed. Providing these instructions are carried out, I will be released on Friday the 31st of January. Kevin Watts must be the person to act as courier and use his car. The money must not be marked in any way whatsoever.
The kidnapper demanded £175,000. He would ring again in 6 days.
That demand caused us some concern because it clearly indicated that the kidnapper had knowledge of Kevin Watts. He'd been in the shop, we know. He'd probably seen Kevin Watts, so that curtailed us slightly in using one of our own officers as a courier, or indeed trying to take another course of action altogether.
Stephanie's manager, Kevin, was asked if he'd deliver the ransom money. As the courier, he'd be in great danger. Stephanie's life would depend on him.
They asked me what I thought about it. Would I be willing to be the courier? And I automatically said yes, whatever it takes.
I wanted to scream inside and shout and say, no, no, you can't. But at the same time, that was somebody's daughter out there. And it wasn't for me to say.
The difficult task of training Kevin to be the courier was given to the head of the regional crime squad, Mick Foster.
We're 99% sure we're dealing with a murderer. So you're actually putting somebody else's life at risk here. You're actually also saying to me, and the kidnapper is saying to us, I want Kevin Watts. He's killed Julie Dart, he's kidnapped Stephanie Slater, and now he wants another member of the public put in a vulnerable position. You know, all those are very critical decisions to go through.
In a cramped back room at Shipway's estate agents, detectives spent the next 6 days preparing Kevin.
But that was all to do with building up confidence and ensuring that when I went out, I was in the right frame of mind.
To make sure he thought of nothing else, the police had to be selective about what they told him.
Do you actually take the responsibility of saying to Kevin Watts, the guy, if it is, who we think it might be, is a murderer, and we're actually putting you in this position, we want you to do it? Now, I have to say, we took the decision not to tell him.
Well, it's just the wearing of the bulletproof vest. I think that was a shocker for you, isn't it?
It was for me, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was quite natural at the time, because the way they did it was...
So pop this bulletproof vest on.
Yeah, you can choose not to wear it if you like, but we're all wearing one, so, you know, be part of the team, be part of the crowd.
You won't need it, no worries, you know, just...
No, just try it on to see if it's comfortable.
The day of reckoning arrived. The day hundreds of detectives had been working towards. The day when the police would find out if Stephanie could be rescued. Everyone was on edge. At 3:23 p.m, the kidnapper made his call.
Hello, Kevin Watts? Speaking. You got the money? Yes, I have. Right. You go to Glossop Station. Glossop? Glossop Station. Okay. West of Manchester. West of Manchester. There's a telephone box inside the entrance hall, only one. And there's only one? Only one. And you'll get a further message at 7 o'clock. 7 p.m? Yes. 7 o'clock. Okay.
Gets in the car and he signs, I love you. I have to wait with a smile on my face, shut the door and think, I can't get the children up for school, you know, as if nothing's wrong, and just, you know, go through the day just not knowing. Just not knowing.
At 3:30 p.m. today, as a result of a telephone call received at Shipways, a pre-planned operation to bring home Stephanie and arrest the kidnapper was launched. The courier is now, as we speak, following instructions from the kidnapper. This operation involves over 1,000 detectives who are now on station.
From Glossop, the kidnapper directed Kevin to drive up across the Pennines into South Yorkshire. He was wearing a police radio so he could repeat to the surveillance team any instructions from the killer. Hundreds of undercover officers discreetly shadowed Kevin, hoping he'd lead them to the kidnapper. One of them was Inspector Dougie Ashford.
Obviously the tension was building. In the days leading up to the actual run, the training that we were doing, we were trying to iron out any gremlins. You know, we were trying to cater for every possible eventuality. We were trying to make sure that every item of kit that we were likely to need was in, you know, were in the vehicles with us. Communications, yeah, we were testing our communications.
Kevin approached a remote public phone box to collect his next set of instructions.
There was a general air of optimism, although the tension was there. You know, we thought, well, this is our golden chance, and it was building to that. You know, it'll all be over in a few hours. Tomorrow we'll be, you know, we'll be interviewing this bloke and putting him before a court sort of attitude, and you think, well, good.
The courier's arrived at the telephone kiosk, but we've got problems with communications and he's breaking up. Proceed, control.
Open boot before going in phone box and leave open until returning. If phone is not ringing, there is a message taped under black shelf. At some time, you will be observed.
At this stage, I was really panicking. I've been out of the car in vulnerable position and I didn't like that. I felt very, very scared. This route will show you if you're being followed. Back to the crossroads 50 yards. Right up the hill, B6449 to Dodworth.
Yes, the courier's been sent to Dodsworth, which is near Barnsley. He's got to go to a phone box at 4 Lanes End. We're with him. It's imperative that there's no other police action or any police presence in that area.
Dense fog disrupted the radio links. The surveillance team were losing touch with each other. The operation began to go badly wrong.
By this time, the fog was really settling in, and it was an absolutely dreadful night. And I only got one thought at that time, and I was just thinking, you know, about this kidnapper. Your luck's in, mate. You know, if you'd got a back phone to God, you couldn't have asked for a better night.
Couldn't see a thing because of the fog as well, being pitch black. And I was thinking that all the time somebody was walking down the side of me here, or perhaps even both sides.
The kidnapper suspected there'd be a police tracking device hidden in the bag with the money. Kevin was told to switch his bag, with one left near a traffic cone.
I walked over to where the traffic cone was, bent down, picked up the bag. I'd already decided that I wasn't going to stay out here because it was too vulnerable. Wanted to get back to the safety of my car, took the bag, ready to transfer all of the money, as requested, out of my hold or into the bag. Got back into my car, locked the door, and started transferring all the money into the bag. At this stage, I did feel completely alone. I couldn't see how it was possible that the police could be with me.
We've lost contact with the courier. His mic's gone completely dead. Receive control.
Trevor, put the contingency plan into operation. Nick, all crews, we've had a loss. Hold the locations and report immediately any visual or radio contact with the courier.
The police now had no idea where Kevin was.
So I was continuing on towards the end of the lane, and to my surprise I saw that there was a cone in the middle of the road. Stop, 60 seconds allowed, on wall by 4 sign, wooden tray. Do not move tray, sensor inside, put money bag on tray. If buzzer does not sound, leave money there. Money will not be collected until you have left. I didn't want the buzzer to sound off, so I very carefully placed the money onto the tray. I did not want the buzzer to sound. I thought it was some kind of device, such as a bomb. At this stage, I was really panicking inside. All that I could think of then was to get back into the car as quickly as possible.
Kevin radioed the police that he'd delivered the money, but he didn't know that his message couldn't be heard.
My next recollection is the dreaded sentence, which I think might go on my gravestone, I suppose. We had a phone call, and I don't recall who it was from. And it just said, we ain't got him, we ain't got her, and we ain't got the money.
There was a dawning realisation that the kidnapper had got the money. And then I think there followed probably one of the blackest periods of my service.
I have never had a period in the police service where, you know, I have felt so low.
The one thought that was in my mind was, well, he's got away with the money. If this guy has killed Julie Dart, what are the chances that he's now going to kill Stephanie if he hasn't already killed her?
The kidnapper had vanished. The police surveillance operation in Yorkshire was stood down.
I think he was about an hour, 2 hours late coming back, and I convinced myself that I was going to die in this box. I thought, he's picked up the money and he's gone. And that's it. He doesn't need me anymore. He hasn't got to come back and release me. The police probably wouldn't find me for a while. Nobody knows where I am. And I tried to move forward in the box, tried to get out. There was no way I could get out.
Her kidnapper returned.
I said, have you got the money? Have you got everything? And he said, I've got everything. I said, can I go now, please? Please, can I go? Are you going to take me home now? And he said, yes, come on. And he had discussed with me where he was going to drop me beforehand. And he'd said, at the top of your road, is it far from your house? Because I don't want anybody getting to you and hurting you. I thought, hurting me? After what I've been through, and you're worried about somebody hurting me?
Stephanie's captor drove her back to Birmingham, dropping her at the end of her street. He opened the car door for her.
And I shut the car door. I heard the car drive off, and I opened my eyes, and then I realised he'd gone and I was free. and my dad just grabbed me and pulled me in. It was strange. It was very strange, but in a beautiful way. I looked around and thought, I'm home. And I didn't believe it. For months and months later, I didn't believe it. I thought I'd died, and this is what would have happened if I'd have lived.
I suddenly thought, well, hang on a minute, this girl's been gone for 7 days. We've lost £175,000. We haven't caught her kidnapper, and she's just walked back in the house.
We went from the extreme disappointment, anger, frustration, to the extreme feeling of success.
That really was uplifting. I couldn't say it was, I was jubilant about it, because we'd failed in some ways, we'd failed. I recognised that if he was capable of delivering her back to Birmingham, then we'd left a gap in our operation that should have been covered.
The kidnapper had dropped Stephanie just 50 yards outside the police surveillance cordon that had kept watch around her house all week. But the surveillance cars had been stood down moments earlier. At one stage, this order was cancelled, but then reinstated. This was the kidnapper's lucky night.
The annoying thing about that, the annoying thing is, but for an extra half hour, it's inconceivable, I suspect, that we wouldn't have caught the kidnapper bringing her back.
Britain's most wanted man was free to drive off. But detectives knew their luck was about to change.
I think most of us that night knew that what he'd done was just capture himself. By returning Slater to us, he'd given us the lead witness, and he was finished.
To help catch her kidnapper, Stephanie had to be debriefed.
We needed to find from her where she'd been kept captive. I remember her saying she went down the slope, she turned left, a door, wooden door, went sliding across, etc., etc. I remember she was blindfolded, she was at the bottom of a car, in the well of her front passenger seat. She couldn't see anything. So she was dependent upon her ears. And so were we.
With Stephanie safely returned, the police could lift the veil of secrecy that had so far hampered their investigation. Door-to-door inquiries revealed a paint sprayer who saw Stephanie getting out of the kidnapper's car. He recognized the make and the exact colour.
I seem to remember boxes arriving overnight, and a total of about 300,000, 290-odd thousand metros in the country, red ones, which really surprised me. The question was never asked of Stephanie, was it an automatic? Had she been asked the question, and had she been able to answer the question, yeah, it's an automatic. There were 490 automatics in there.
The 490 cars would have taken detectives just 2 days to sort through. Sitting on the desk in front of them was the kidnapper's name and address. So near, and yet still 1 in 290,000. West Midlands police continued their in-depth interviewing of Stephanie. She provided them with a good description of her kidnapper, and within days, they had a photo-fit picture. The police went into overdrive. Nearly 8,000 witnesses were interviewed, more than 5,000 houses visited, and over 6,000 calls taken from the public.
We now have a detailed description. We know what vehicle he drives, and we've got his voice.
Armed with these vital clues, the police went on television, just 3 weeks after Stephanie had been released.
In a few minutes, you'll hear the voice of the man who kidnapped Stephanie Slater.
I want to speak to Kevin Watts, quickly, please.
Who's calling?
Never mind.
Hello?
Have you got the money?
Who's this, please?
Never mind. Have you got the money?
And then he said, never mind. Even when I think about it, I go cold. I just went hysterical. I knew immediately it was his voice. And I paced up and down the room 20 or 30 times, just shouting, it's him, it's him.
Susan Oak phoned the police in Yorkshire to tell them it was her ex-husband, Michael Sams. But the man who'd evaded 1,000 detectives and got away with £175,000 in cash only had one leg. Sams was traced to his workshop in Newark. Detective Tim Grogan from West Yorkshire Police drove down from Leeds.
This is a real build-up of the adrenaline. Well, our recollections were of the statement that Stephanie had said when she said we slowed down, and here we are slowing down. And she said we slowly descended a hill, which of course we are doing at the moment. And then slowly the car turned left in an arc or crescent, which of course we're doing now. And of course, Sam's used to park in that corner there. Parked up, got out of the car. Of course, the first thing it issues is the blast of wind that Stephanie once again described in a statement. You can feel it now. Then you go into what is a sheltered area, once again, how she described it. First thing you're confronted with on this door was stencils. A door with on heavy metal runners. You're in the workshop, obviously it's a lot different to what it was then. Sam's wasn't here, he was at the back of the workshop. I had to call him. He made his way towards us, explained who he was. And as he's talking to us, explaining who he is, of course you're able to see all the things that Stephanie had described in a statement. The long beam, the alarm, Radio 2 playing, more stencils. Everything was just how she described it. So it was a simple job of just telling him he was under arrest and for us to inform Bob Taylor that the man we've been looking for 9 months was now in our custody.
Michael Sams, a middle-aged, self-employed tool repairer, was taken to Newark Police Station. He immediately confessed to the kidnapping of Stephanie Slater, but he denied blackmailing British Rail and killing Julie Dart.
I believe that the mistake that Julie Dart made when you had her confined was that she had tried to escape or remove that blindfold, and that is why she saw where she was, she saw you, and she had to die. Is that the truth?
No, it isn't the truth. There's no truth in that whatsoever.
And so Julie Dart was not as fortunate, or not, shall we say, not quite as compliant with your instructions as Stephanie Slater was. And in fact, I think through her complying with your instructions to the letter is the only thing that saved Stephanie Slater's life.
Stephanie would have gone home any time.
Julie Dart didn't go home. She ended up naked in a field in Lincolnshire.
But I didn't do that. I can guarantee, I know
it's
I
because she didn't comply with your instructions,
no,
isn't it?
Totally wrong there.
Not totally wrong.
You are totally wrong there.
During his interrogation, Detective Grogan showed him some of the murderer's letters.
Absolutely, sir, yes.
This doesn't bring back any memories.
No.
Words will never be able to express my regret that Julie Dart had to be killed.
No.
But I did warn what would happen if anything went wrong.
No.
Doesn't at all.
Not one little bit.
The reason the body deteriorated so quick was that it was kept in a wheelie bin in a greenhouse for 2 very hot days. I thought this was the best way to keep the body. Her head was wrapped in a towel. But when this was removed to clean her up before dropping her, her hair came away, stuck to the blood on the towel.
No, it doesn't mean anything to me, but...
Doesn't it?
Sam shifted the blame for Julie's murder onto a mysterious accomplice. Whilst in prison, he claimed that the other man was spending his share of the ransom. If the police could find all of the money, they could prove there was no other man and crack his defence. Sams was a train spotter. He admitted to being at a place called Stoke Summit on the main East Coast Railway line just before his arrest. The police took a gamble and decided this was where they would search for the money.
So we started off in that corner, and unfortunately drew a blank, and moved on slowly to decide whether to go onto that side or that side, and eventually decided that that side was going to be the most profitable because it was clear and there weren't as many obstructions around. It's the sort of place that Sams would have found accessible even with one leg.
A special radar device was used that could locate objects buried in the ground.
Even after 7.5 years, it looks much the same as it did when we were here before. And in fact, there's the very spot where the lads dug up the first batch of money. Still depression in the ground.
Yeah, it was only about 16 feet further on down here that we found the second lot of money. That was the major high point for me. And I did just lose it for a moment and ran round the field shouting, "Got you, Sams." And yeah, it was a most important point in the inquiry because he knew we'd destroyed his defence.
For 18 years, Michael Sams schemed to get his revenge on the police. He claimed his wife had an affair with a West Yorkshire police officer. His marriage broke down, his business collapsed. He got involved in car fraud and was convicted. Whilst in jail, an injury to his leg went untreated. It had to be amputated for gangrene. Sams had been an athlete. Embittered, he entered into a deadly game with the police. A game which led to the murder of Julie Dart, but allowed Stephanie Slater to live.
I think credit has got to be given to Stephanie for the manner in which she dealt with Sams. I also think that he fell in love with her. There was one thing which seemed significant, which was that she said that she was adopted. And Sam's background was that he felt as if he was adopted, and he said, "That makes you a special person, because you were chosen." And I think that was it. His plans went awry because he developed deeper feelings for Stephanie than perhaps were part of his plan.
The relationship developed within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes. As soon as I knew what I was doing, it didn't really dawn on me what I was doing until I did it. It was only plan, and then once I'd started, yeah, it dawned on me then. That was the emotional side I could not ever plan for.
You just
I could not, no, you cannot plan. You don't know what, you can't tell me how I felt when I had it. You've no idea.
Why did you let it go then?
It isn't the same feeling that you've got punishing me now. It's completely different.
When you think about the days when Stephanie had been kidnapped and we wondered where she was, the last place on earth you would have thought that Stephanie would have been kept is in a place so close to public activity that this place is. But then when you stand here now, you could be a million miles away from reality. And that was Sam's. He was a million miles away from reality in his own world, and he brought those two girls into his world.
There's only one person knows exactly what happened in here, and Michael Sams, and he's not really properly described what happened. I firmly believe that Julie was kept in that sort of area, in a what was a makeshift box made out of wood chippings. Julie was claustrophobic. Sams was aware of that. The place was built as a tomb, and the fact is that she escaped from there. She was a very fit young lady. I think a struggle took place, and I think he hit her on the head several times with a hammer, and I think that she didn't die immediately. I think she was probably gurgling, and he eventually strangled her, and that's where she met her end, somewhere in here.
Michael Sams, killer and kidnapper, gets 4 life sentences. Good evening. Relatives of the victims of Michael Sams applauded and cheered today as the judge described him as evil and dangerous.
4 days later, Sams confessed to murdering Julie Dart.